Hello, we're all aware of the upcoming transition to MEDIVIEW for our PCR software. This change is happening as of 12:01 a.m. September 1st, whether you're ready or not. Many of you have not availed yourself of the opportunity to sit with me on a one-on-one basis to review the new software. Most of you have made this change more dramatic than it really is. This software is not difficult to use. It is, however, different from what you're accustomed to using. But it is not so different as to prevent you from completing your paperwork. Over the next few minutes, I will be completing a few calls for you to watch. As I complete these calls, I will explain each of the relevant fields and any tricks I've learned along the way. This software is not difficult to use. I cannot emphasize that enough. You have all completed a difficult course of study to achieve your level of certification, thus proving you're an intelligent emergency medical care providers. Learning this new software will not be as difficult as you may think. You must understand that this transition will happen. You have been emailed a list of calls you must complete prior to August 31st. Britt has made it clear that those who have not completed these calls will not be allowed to work as of September 1st. You may enter your sample calls using MEDIVIEW Hub. With the exception of capturing signatures, the Hub works exactly the same way as the tablet version of the software. The Hub can be accessed from any PC with Internet Explorer. Please note, you cannot use Microsoft Edge. You must use Internet Explorer or Firefox with the Silverlight plugin installed and enabled. So once you log in, you'll be greeted by the home page. On this page, you will select who the current crew on the truck is. You will also begin your new calls from here. Later, when Phase 2 is implemented, you'll see call information from CAD from dispatch here as well. We will discuss that at a later date. To create a new call, you'll simply click on the New button. After your new call is created, you'll need to enter that particular call by clicking on Start Here. You'll want to select the call type. For this sample call, we'll be working a cardiac patient. On this page, you can also select the date and time of your initial assessment, the patient's initial acuity, and you can mark what your findings of that initial assessment are. In this case, we're going to select chest pain. Notice on the date and time field, when I select chest pain, it enters a date and time of right now. You can, however, change that time to the time you actually complete that assessment. We're going to skip the paper form for now and move to the crew roles. Under crew roles, you will see both crew members listed. For each call, you will need to have one person designated as the driver and one person designated as a primary caregiver. On this page, you will see there is a show under each crew member for miscellaneous crew info. You will expand that and indicate what personal protective equipment was used on that call. And you will do this for each person. For each person, you will also notice there is a yes/no field for suspected work-related exposure. If there was an exposure, you will expand that field, select yes, and choose the type of exposure. In this case, there was no exposure. We'll mark that for both crew members. If there are additional crew members on this run with you who are not on our roster or who are not on this list, if you pick up a third person for some reason, you can add that person. If they're on our roster, you can add them from our roster. If they're from another agency, you can select Other Agency and enter that person's information here. This would apply to firefighters and first responders who drive on an emergency call. This would also apply to students. When you enter someone, you must enter a license number for them. This can be as simple as 6 nines. If it's a student, the student does have an SC number. You would want to enter that SC number. Even if the student is an EMT basic, if they're riding with you, they have an SC number. It was assigned to them on the first day of class. I want to select their level. In this case, we're talking about a student, where they're licensed or certified. If they were with another agency, you would select that here and add the crew member. Now you see that third person on the list. Next, we'll move to the incident page. The incident page will contain a lot of information that we will get directly from CAD beginning with Phase 2. However, for now, we must enter this information. The dispatch complaint. What are they complaining of? They're complaining of chest pain. How we responded to the scene, emergency. PSAP, or Public Safety Access Point call, is the time the call initially came into the 911 center. And that is a date and time, not a time and date. The date dispatch was notified. The date our truck was dispatched. The date and time our truck was en route. Whether or not EMD was performed. The incident number is the number CAD is the number dispatch is assigning to our calls. This will be 16 and 4 digits. The EMS response number is a number that will be generated automatically by CAD. If you get a fax from dispatch with CAD information, you can enter this, but for now you can leave it blank. This will come over automatically from CAD when we have CAD enabled. The type of service requested, this is a 911 response. This is not a standby, but if it were a standby, you could enter the type of standby. For example, a sporting event or EMS staging to improve coverage. The primary role of this unit is a ground transport. The truck number that you're on. The call sign, in this case, is a DHEC number on the truck. The level of care of the truck, and what shift you're on. For now, we're not going to worry about the additional response mode, descriptors, or additional dispatch information. Moving on to the next tab, Dispatch 2. You can either select a predefined location. This will include many of the local hospitals, as well as all of the nursing homes and dialysis centers in Chester County. You can also use the patient's address if you already have that entered, or you can enter the location now. And you'll also enter the scene arrival time. If you were going to a facility, the facility name would be there. You may not know the facility code, the address, the zip codes, but if I know the city that I'm in, search for the zip code. And that works in both directions. I can enter the zip code, go back to my class and get the city and state. Also, the county and country. enter the incident location type. So you can start typing here, and as you type, you see it filters down to a list of different things. You can just click on the drop down and get the list, and there is a very extensive list. Or you can click on the select button and drill down to the type of location you're responding to. In this case, we're responding to a residence, which is a single family home, and the patient is in. Once we have that information, we click on confirm. Many of these drill downs correspond directly to ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes. If we're responding to an incident on the interstate, we can enter the interstate marker here as well. Dispatch from is simple enough. You're going to select the location or enter the address you were dispatched from, or you can simply pick one of the predefined stations and click on Set Dispatch Location. Scene information. Again, you see the arrival on scene time. This was carried forward from the Dispatch To field we completed earlier. It's asking you if you were the first unit on scene. If you were not the first unit on scene, you would need to enter the time that the first responders arrived on the scene. That time, if you select you were not the first unit on scene, the initial responder time must be before your arrival time. If you were the first unit on scene, mark yes. Indicate the time you arrived at the patient. You can enter your depart scene time here, or you can enter it later. Indicate the number of patients you have, in this case a single patient. This field, EMS Care Transferred, is somewhat of a confusing field. Many providers have mistakenly entered the time and date the patient care was transferred to the hospital staff in this field. That is incorrect. This field indicates the date and time that you transferred care to another EMS provider. For example, if you're transferring care of your patient to a helicopter crew, you will indicate that time in this field. You can also indicate other agencies that were on scene by their name and the type of agency. You can look at the show buttons here. If this is a mass casualty, you can indicate that information. If this were a cardiac arrest where CPR was being rendered and an AED was being used, you can provide that information as well. The Passengers tab under Incident is there to indicate if a family member or another person who is not a crew member or the patient is riding in your truck. For example, if you pick up a child and the child's parent rides with you, you will indicate that parent's information in this field. Here we might say that we have a wife or a sibling, spouse riding with us. Vehicular information is going to be relevant when we complete a report for a motor vehicle accident. Injury information is going to be relevant if we're completing a report for an injury. You will need to mark whether this is a possible injury or not. In this case, we're dealing with a cardiac patient. We will indicate that no, this was not an injury. Moving on to the Patient tab. Patient's demographic information and identity information, you'll enter their last name, first name. list their gender. You can enter their date of birth. When you enter their date of birth, if I enter that correctly, when you enter the date of birth, it should automatically calculate their age. EMS patient ID field is not relevant to us. We'll want to obtain their social security number, and if possible, their driver's license number and state of issue. On this page, we will also indicate their race. I'm not sure what race a mouse would be. On some fields, you will have small gray boxes above the field. These are descriptors that may disqualify this field for some reason. For example, if you're unable to obtain a name, if the patient refused to give their name, or if they're unconscious or unable to comply. We'll need their contact information. We can use their address from the incident location and simply copy that in, or we can fill this information in. You can take a picture using the camera on the tablet of their identification documents. If you capture their driver's license, you can take a picture of their driver's license, of their insurance cards later on, their passport, or whatever identifying documents they may have. This is highly suggested. It will help us in the billing process. If you can get their phone number, that will also be helpful. Their employer information would also be helpful in the case of billing. The employer information is very useful, if not required, in cases of a workman's comp injury. If you have any doubt as to whether an injury or illness is work-related, assume that it is until proven otherwise. If an injury or illness happens to an employee at a work site, in general, it is a workman's comp related issue. If you want to get next of kin information or guardian information, that can be entered as well. Insurance information is required. You'll need to indicate the method of payment that the patient has offered you. You may choose self-pay, you may choose a workman's comp or any of these others, but you must choose something. You must choose the patient's relationship to the payer. For example, if you're transporting a child, the patient's relationship would be, the payer would be the parent, the patient's relationship would be child. In this case, the patient is himself. You would enter a policy number, group ID, insurance company name, etc. All of this information needs to be entered. You will also want to take a picture of the insurance card, front and back. Taking a picture of the card is not a substitute for completing these fields. And again, some information you can copy from the patient or the relative's information. Note that you can add additional insurance providers, and you can add multiple additional insurance providers. Billing in CMS is exactly what you're used to seeing already. The response urgency of the call, whether it was immediate or not immediate. Whether the person resides within the EMS service area or not. Whether an ALS assessment was performed and warranted or not. This is a different field for us. It is possible to bill for an ALS assessment even though the call turns out to be a BLS call and BLS transport. So if it is an ALS assessment handed off to a BLS transport, be sure to mark that it's an ALS assessment. You'll want to enter any supplies that are used during the course of this call, and we'll come back to this later. You'll want to enter why an ambulance transport was needed. If this is a routine or scheduled transport, you'll want to complete the following CMS information. We move on to the patient health information. Their past medical history. Now in this case, again, you see their qualifiers here: not applicable, none reported, refused, unresponsive, or unable to complete for some other reason. You will want to enter information about all of the patient's past medical history. This list is very extensive. You can also click on the drill down button and select some quick favorites that may be relevant. For example, Mickey is a diabetic type 2. Mickey has hypertension. Mickey drinks a little too much. Mickey has high cholesterol. And you click on confirm. You'll see that it entered each one of those. You can still add more if you choose to. By clicking on the add button, I've brought up a new field. I can click in that field. I can also begin typing. This list is extensive, and lists like these will take some getting used to. I don't know all the answers to these lists, but everything is there. You can enter their past hospitalizations, their past immunizations. You can also enter family history in the exact same way. You can pick different family members and enter their medical history as well. You also want to indicate who gave you the medical history. If the patient has any medication allergies, you'll want to enter those. Again, there's a drill down, so you can pick from the drill down list. You can simply type. And you see for penicillin, there are a variety of penicillin variants you can choose, or you can just type penicillin, how they react, and what comments you have. Alternately, if there is no medication allergy, you can indicate no known drug allergies. You can click that it's not applicable. You can indicate that they refused to answer, that they were unresponsive, or that they were unable to comply for some other reason. If they have environmental allergies, you can enter those as well. They're not required. You will also enter their current medications. Don't be intimidated by this page. You can either look at the detailed version or the review version. And again, you can enter that it's not applicable, none reported, that they refused to report, that they were unresponsive, or you were unable to complete for some other reason. On this page, you'll note you have a drill down option available to you. On the drill down, you can select different medication classes. And drill down based on those classes. You can also simply type the name of the medication and it will fill in. If you're working with a large number of medications, you can simply take a picture of the pill bottles. Again, note that taking a picture of the pill bottles does not complete this information. These fields will need to be completed. Next, we'll move to the assessment page. You'll want to put the date and time of the patient's symptoms. Date and time of their last symptom. Well, this is especially important in the case of stroke patients. The anatomic location of their symptoms, chest, cardiovascular, their chief complaint, how long this has been happening, any other complaints they have, their symptoms, in this case it's non-traumatic chest pain, and their other associated symptom might be nausea. You'll want to indicate your primary impression. Again, we've pulled some information in from previous pages. You have a select button where you can pick a drill down. We're dealing with a cardiac patient. Pick the one that applies most. Confirm it. Your secondary impression is exactly the same way. We also have some boxes we can open up here. One is the PEAT or quality of life score. This will be important to us as we move forward in attempting to follow up on some of our more indigent patients and ensuring that they're making it through the extremely hot and extremely cold days. You'll indicate the cleanliness of their house, their social structure, whether there are any perceptible hazards. There's a big mousetrap right outside of Mickey's door. We'll want to indicate the type of dwelling and the qualifiers for their dwelling, whether or not it's temperature safe, whether they have running water, electricity, or an enclosed shelter. This calculates a PEAT score that we can use later on to run a report to see who our more frail patients are. Potential system or specialty registry patients. If you activate a team for a cardiac patient, a burn patient, an airway patient, spinal patient, a STEMI patient, or what have you, you'll want to indicate that here. And finally, alcohol and drug use indicators. These are things that you see at the scene that are relevant to the patient's overall outcome. For example, if Mickey denies being an alcoholic, but you see alcohol containers on scene, you can note that. If Mickey denies using drugs, you can note that there was paraphernalia on scene. You could note if the patient admits or admits drug use or alcohol use. You can also indicate that they deny alcohol use and they deny drug use. But at the same time, you can smell alcohol on his breath. We move on to the physical page, the physical assessment. You'll notice first we'll enter the patient's height and weight. If it's a pediatric patient, you can enter the length-based color that would apply. You can enter the time of your initial assessment, and you can indicate what you found on your impression under each of the individual items, or you can select within normal limits for all items. Note that if you enter the time before you select the impression, it carries that time throughout all of the impressions that you select. However, if you do not enter a time when you make this assessment, it will enter the time right now, the time of the current time that you press the button. Move on, enter the patient's vital signs. First, were the patient's vitals taken prior to your arrival? If they were, for example by a first responder, and you wish to include them here, you will enter that they were taken, yes, taken by prior to your arrival. If you check this as yes, the date and time of the vital signs must be prior to your on-scene time. Otherwise, if you mark no, it'll create a new set of vitals. Enter the time right now. You will select who did the vitals. Again, if it was someone who's not on your list of crew members, you can add them. You can add people from other agencies. You'll enter the vital signs. As you move from field to field, this information is saved. If you click now anywhere off of any of the vital signs, all of this information will be saved. And you'll see here that you have one set of vitals obtained. If you wish to add a second set of vitals, click on the Add button. You can either enter all of the information manually, or you can select Copy from Latest Set. Notice it entered the time right now. That would need to be corrected to the time of the vital signs were actually obtained. And you can continue doing that. You can copy additional sets of vitals. You'll see now there are 2 sets of vitals that have been collected. Scales and scores. Again, prior to EMS care is exactly the same. The date and time the scores were calculated. Who calculated these scores? Their GCS. If there's a GCS qualifier that's mandated by their condition, and you see their GCS is calculated. If it were a newborn, you would calculate their APCAR. You can calculate a FLAC score. You can indicate a level of responsiveness, whether or not they meet the qualifications for a reperfusion checklist, their pain, and what pain scale you used. The race stroke scale is in here if they're having a stroke or stroke-like symptoms. And you can calculate their revised trauma score and pediatric trauma score as well. If you're using a device such as a monitor, you can select that device and information will be pulled automatically from that device. Since this is a cardiac patient, we will be capturing an EKG. We captured it at 9:20. We'll say Todd got that one. First was a 3-lead, was interpreted manually, and it showed a normal sinus rhythm. You can see all the options there. Immediately thereafter, we captured another EKG, again by Todd. This was a left-sided 12-lead, interpreted manually, which indicated a normal sinus. You can select multiple options if multiple conditions apply. Next, we'll make treatments. First, you have medications. In this case, we're dealing with a chest pain. Protocol for chest pain is aspirin. So that's the first medication we administer. However, in this case, Mickey has said that he's allergic to aspirin. So we want to indicate on our documentation that we considered aspirin, but elected not to. And if you look at the top, there are reasons why we may not do something. We were unable to complete for some reason. The patient refused. The medication was already taken, for example, if the patient took aspirin prior to EMS arrival. The patient has a medication allergy. The medication was denied by order. The medication was contraindicated for some reason, or the medication was not applicable for some reason. In this case, we'll indicate that the aspirin, the patient has a medication allergy to aspirin. That will document that we considered aspirin, but did not administer it due to a medication allergy. Protocol for chest pain also calls for a IV, so we'll move over to the procedures page. This was not prior to care, prior to EMS. The procedure performed was an extremity IV. Which of course is an IV procedure. Was in the left hand with a 20 gauge on one attempt, successful. Patient's response was unchanged, performed by our student, who is a student. This procedure was authorized by protocol. There were no complications. Now that we have an IV established, and we have a EKG, we will also administer some nitroglycerin. And again, there are no complications. As we're en route to the hospital, hypothetically, we receive orders for one more drug, morphine. Chose that for a specific reason you'll see in just a moment. And again, no complications. We have a controlled substances tab on this page. We can enter the date and time that we gave the medication. who authorized it, the time of the authorization. If we can get the patient's chart number, we can put that there. Who is signing for this? The medication used. Now notice this list only shows the medications that we have actually administered. Our medication list is much longer than this. This is only showing the medications that we have actually administered. How much was used? How much was wasted? Number of vials used. And here we have spaces for everyone to sign off on this. And if this was a standing order or not, the expiration of the drug, and other information. For the moment, we'll be using our own narcotics form. That is available by clicking on the Forms button, Forms and Documents and Signatures button at the bottom of the screen. Selecting the Controlled Substances Administration document, and you'll see your familiar form. This is an ink on PDF form. If you're not familiar with that, what that means is that you can simply write directly on the tablet. And it's too difficult to try to complete this with a mouse, but you get the idea. Can now return to my patient form. Procedures, we started an IV. We have ran a 12 lead on this patient. Indicate that it's not an IV procedure. It wasn't before us when we did it. If you perform an invasive airway, date and time that was decision was made, date and time the attempt was abandoned, indications, complications, suspected reasons for failure, and airway confirmation. Notice on airway confirmation, you have the option of entering multiple methods of confirmation. You can only put one method in for each block. So I confirm the airway by auscultation. Come back, add. I confirm the method, the placement by a colorimetric device. You can compress these down, make it easier to view. Add. I confirmed placement by visually. I can check any of these. Each one has to stand by itself, though. If CPR was being performed on the patient, you will enter the relevant information for the CPR here. Type of CPR being done. Date and time of cardiac arrest. Date of onset of CPR. Whether or not it was a confirmed cardiac arrest. The cause of the cardiac arrest, if known. Who witnessed the arrest? What attempts were made by EMS for resuscitation? Type of CPR performed, first monitored rhythm. Date and time CPR was discontinued. Who ordered the discontinuation of CPR? How the event ended for EMS. If there was ROSC. And what the cardiac rhythm at destination was. Finally, we move to the drop-off page. Your destination ER. Every ER in the country, every hospital in the country is listed in here. For example, Cleveland Regional Medical Center in Shelby, North Carolina. Begin typing, set the location. And it will eventually fill in the information. The type of destination you're going to. We're going to a hospital emergency department. Patient's acuity upon arrival, still unchanged. The reason for choosing this destination, whatever the reason might be. The hospital's capability, Shelby is a level 3 trauma center. If you were going to Chester, you might select Hospital General. If you were going to Augusta, you might select Burn Center. If you're going to Charlotte, you might select Level 1, etc. Their destination in the hospital, ER. Destination care transferred, the time the patient care was transferred to the ER. Air vehicle destination is not relevant to us. Transport, total patients transported, 1. How they got to the ambulance. They were on the stretcher. They were in the semi-Fowler's position. They were treated and transported by EMS or whatever the disposition was. If the call was canceled, why it was canceled. With a more descriptive reason why. How the patient was moved from the ambulance to the ER. EMS transport method. This is a ground vehicle. Transport mode from scene was non-emergent. And again, we're not worried about additional transport mode descriptors. If the patient was not transported, any instructions that you gave them would be noted here. For example, if you told them to call 911 or see your doctor if the problems returned, you would note that here. If you activated a trauma team, stroke team, OB team, sepsis team, any of those would be indicated here. And the date and time of the activation. You will type your narrative. For the sake of the demonstration, just a simple bit of text. I like to think of the narrative as being what protects me, my view of the scene, my view of the patient, my painting a word picture of the call, where the drop downs and the check boxes and the buttons are all objective data that the state is using for research purposes. You want both to be as complete as possible. This is your protection. You have the option of printing your documents if you wish. The structured data will give you a view of the entire document as it would be printed. Including signatures. Your signature pages are here also. Your ink on paper pages. If you wanted to attach a PDF of some other document that you've scanned, you can do that here as well. Next, we'll move to the Review and Submit button. You'll want to verify all of your times. Again, EMS care transferred is not the time you transferred the care of the patient to the ER. It is the time you transferred the care of a patient to another EMS unit, such as a helicopter. Your departed scene time. You arrived at destination time. You're back in service time. If the call were canceled, you would enter that. Your in quarters are back at home time. And the time you were completely finished with your call. If you encountered any delays in the call, such as ED crowding, prevented your transfer of care, a transport delay of some kind, any delay can be indicated here. The protocols that you used for this patient, the treatment protocols, and age. ED report, ED outcome. You can give your chief complaint to the ED, your first systolic pressure in the ED if you want to capture that for trending purposes. A lot of this information we're simply not going to have. Likewise with their hospital outcome, we're not going to know what their final disposition from the hospital is. Our odometer readings. And again, I'm making something up. I don't know that the total distance out of county or out of the service area would be relevant to us. Addendums would come into play at a later time if the call has been sent back to you for QA and you needed to add documentation. And finally, validation. You can click on Run for each one of these validation rule sets. And when I did, you'll see immediately that it failed validation for these reasons. You'll see these dates are incorrect. You can go straight back to validation, run that again. In this case, it failed because that administration time was not within the time that we were on the call. Looks like nitro was the same thing. Overall, times will be the biggest issue that will cause you problems. And here again, you see date and time of vital signs, assessments, etc. Okay, so I fixed the time issues in this call. Now we can run validation. Come back to review and submit, to validation, and click submit. So finally, I have all of my times fixed now. You'll want to capture crew signatures at this time. You'll do that right here below the validation errors. You can also capture the signature of the receiving facility. You'll want to go to your forms, again along the buttons on the bottom row, and pick the release of billing HIPAA information acknowledgement and release for the patient if they're transporting. Have that form signed. You'll want to indicate who was signing this form, whether it was the patient. They can sign and type their name. The patient's guardian or representative can sign and type their name. The disposition of the signature, and the relationship type. If this was a no transport, you'll want to indicate the patient's refusal of care. Again, patient signing, the patient's guardian signing, and a witness. Or if this patient was in law enforcement custody, again, you will want to indicate the refusal of care, the patient signing, and a witness. After this is all complete, we can go to validation and submit the chart. Click on the submit button. It'll run the validations again. You'll notice some things are recommended but not required. Recommended items will not cause the chart to be rejected. Required items will. And it takes you back to your home screen, and this chart is now completed. And that's it. It's a little more difficult maybe than what you're used to, but once you get used to this, it'll seem as simple as anything else. If you're doing a motor vehicle accident, you can, of course, enter all of the same information you would for any other patient. Create your new chart. The differences being that for a motor vehicle accident, under vehicular, you'll want to indicate whether or not the airbags deployed or which airbags deployed, whether or not the patient had a booster seat or a helmet or a seat belt or other protective equipment, where they were at in the vehicle, where the vehicle was damaged in relation to a clock. If it's a head-on damage or front-end damage, you'll enter 12 o'clock. If it's rear-end damage, you'll enter 6 o'clock. The ACN information may come from dispatch through CAD if the vehicle wrecked is an OnStar vehicle. If the call is related to an injury, you'll enter the possible injury information. Again, select the cause of the injury using a drop-down. Select their patient activity using the drop-down or the drill-down. The mechanism of injury, whether they meet trauma center criteria or not, whether there was some risk factor involved, and if it was a work comp related accident, any OSHA PPE that was being used at the time. If there are multiple patients at a single incident, you can create the initial incident, close it, which does not lock the record for editing. Click on the record and click on Clone Incident. This will duplicate the record, saving you from having to enter times and incident information, incident location details, etc. When you're entering a report, if you would like, after you start the report, you can go to the paper form. Anything you enter on the paper form will fill in the appropriate locations on the tabs and pages. At the same time, anything you enter on tabs and pages will complete the corresponding fields on the paper form. create one more call quickly. In this case, I'll show you how a paper form might be more expeditious than using the tabs and pages. In this case, we'll create a chart for a standby. Select standby, go to crew roles, select driver and caregiver, and then under paper form, you'll notice on the left hand side many of the fields that are available are now turned off. This makes the paper form much shorter and much quicker to complete. Then you would only enter the information required for a standby. And that's it. That's the basics of entering a call in MEDIVIEW. It's different, but it's not as difficult as you may believe. You can do it. Now you have until August the 31st to complete your 5 calls. Please hurry and get those done. Thank you, and have a great day.